As people are just coming in, I'll just, I guess, introduce myself. My name is Tim Fedak. I'm the Curator of Geology with the Nova Scotia Museum. And this is the second Mastodon Monday lunch and learn that we're hosting for the museum staff and departmental staff. Before I introduce Bob, very briefly, I just also would like to start with a recognition that we are here in Halifax in Mi'kmaq, and it's the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and just an opportunity to recognize that we're all treaty people. And so it is my pleasure to introduce Bob Grantham for this quick lunch and learn. Bob was recently retired, or most recently associated with the Johnson Geo Center, created the Johnson Geo Center back in 2002. Before that, and perhaps how many of you would know Bob, would be through 26 years, I think, with the Nova Scotia Museum as Curator of Geology from 1974 to around 2000. So while he was curator here, he, dug dinosaurs, found mastodons, and answered thousands of public inquiries of geology all around the province. So he has many stories to tell. He's going to focus his time on the work he did in Milford in 1991. Bob is also a founding member of the Atlantic Aviation Museum that's out near the airport, and also the Fundy Geological Museum, which he's an active board member of that museum still. So thank you, Bob, for that volunteer activity important stuff that you do there too. So with that, I just want to pass it over to Bob. He'll probably talk for about 20 minutes, and then be available to answer some questions. And with that, I'll pass it over to Bob.
Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate that. I thought it was 3 hours that I had, but anyway, just kidding. Very happy to be here today. It's a real thrill to talk about one of the most dynamic and demanding projects I've been involved in my career, and that was the excavation of 2 mastodons in Milford, and at the gypsum quarry, National Gypsum Canada in Milford. Wonderful discovery, good fun. I just want to show you one thing. This is a magnifying glass that I have around my neck. I'll be referring to this later because when most geologists, when they're in the field, have a magnifier or lens, whatever you want to call it, around their neck so they can see a specimen and up close and see a bit more detail of what it's made of. So the way it's used is bring it up to your eye and bring the specimen up close like that. And I'll refer to that later on. You'll see where in the talk. I'm just going to move my Zoom screen over here, and we'll start the presentation. I guess I can share now. Yep, wonderful. So do you have that the title slide?
Yep, got it. Looks good.
Thanks. Mastodons are different than mammoths. Everybody knows about mammoths. Well, mastodons are slightly different. They have a long sloping forehead and generally straighter tusks. Their teeth are quite different as well. Plus, mastodons were forest edge dwellers and mammoths were grassland dwellers, and that's very obvious in the structure of their teeth. So today I want to talk to you quickly about the Milford digs from 1991 to 1993. This is a sampler, a little bit of what happened during the digs and the progress of what was found and so on. And I'm very pleased to do this. Of course, I'm rising up out of the swamp there, Bob Grantham. And this is our part of the Lunch and Learn series for mastodons. Back in October 21st, 1991, this was the scene that I walked up to after getting a phone call from National Gypsum earlier in the afternoon, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They called me. They said they had found something I might want to have a look at. And I said, well, I can't come up. I said, I've I was up there, a month ago looking at some small snails that they had found. And I said, we museum can't afford it. I can't come up. And Jim McCubbin, the quarry superintendent, he says, well, it's a tusk and big teeth. Anyway, I did a dance and I said, I'll be right there. When I drove in the truck with the company, this is what I saw. And you can see a little closer view here, what was confronting me. Very obviously, some beautiful molars, mastodon molars you see here. These are tusk fragments here, not fragments, but big pieces of tusk, and some hip bones, the pelvic region of a mastodon. You get the hammer there for scale, you get an idea what they are. These are all bucket-sized pieces because they were being dug out by a backhoe. And Stanley McMullen, who digs out the ground in this area, came across these pieces, got out of his machine, had a look, then looked in the hole that he was digging and saw these teeth staring up at him. So he knew he had something important and he called his boss. He'd been digging these holes out for 30 years. You think after 30 years, you wouldn't be looking at what you're digging out, but he would watch every bucket because he knew there could be something special in them. This is the quarry that stood in October of 1991. These are some large equipment down here, a loader and a truck being loaded. They just blasted down some gypsum. As everybody knows, the crust of the planet is rock. That's what this is. This is all gypsum. And on top of the gypsum are glacial deposits or water or sand or mud or whatever, but everything is rock. So this is what they're mining here, is the gypsum. It's a neat spot because there are sinkholes in the surface of the gypsum, which are holes that develop as water moves over the surface of gypsum, percolates down through cracks and crevices, dissolves the gypsum because it's very soft rock, and it basically forms cavities underground that collapse to the surface. And those collapses are called sinkholes. Very famous one recently in Amherst that Amy Tizard was looking at for the part of the natural resources at that time and documenting. And that was a fairly recent sinkhole. Well, these are sinkholes that developed in this area over here. That just says Cretaceous site. These are sinkholes that developed 125 million years ago, and they're covered by glacial deposits. This site here and this site here are the two sites where the mastodons were found. And these date to about 75,000 years ago. Just a little closer view of what the sinkholes look like. Before they mine the gypsum, they have to remove the area above the sinkholes, clean it all out, and also excavate all the material down in the cavities in the sinkholes in order to not dilute the gypsum. And as you know, gypsum is used in wallboard primarily. It's a very good filler that makes a good solid wallboard. Lots of other uses as well. When you brush your teeth today, you probably had gypsum in your toothpaste. Sometimes it's used in bread as a filler and so on. So it's got a lot of uses. This area was covered by the East Milford Till, which is a glacial till deposited about 23,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago. This is material that was deposited after the glass glaciers melted away from Nova Scotia, and it built up to about 30 meters in depth. This was the first mastodon was discovered here. That structure is one that we had built over the site. And the second mastodon was discovered over here. And right now, nobody knows it's there when the time this picture was taken, because they were just starting to strip that area. This is a closer view of the large teeth that were found. This is a 12-inch ruler down here, or 24 centimeter, whatever it is, or 30, anyway, so many centimeters, 12 inches. And as you see, the teeth are very large. And a closer look at these reveals some interesting details. By the way, this is upside down. The front of the mastodon's mouth is out this way, and this is the nasal passages up through here. So a little closer view of the teeth. You can see the wear on the tooth from chewing and from eating trees, which is primarily what they chewed on, were coniferous trees, and ate. But what was fascinating was this color here. This pinkish color should not be there. It caused me great concern when I first saw this. I thought, why is that pink? So about 2 weeks after the discovery, I was sitting in the barber shop waiting to get my hair cut, and I picked up a Reader's Digest and I started to read it. And here was an article on pink tooth syndrome, which is a syndrome that develops when a person or a mammal or anybody drowns and is left in the head down position in water. It's a forensic technique to determine method of death. And there's such a massive increase in blood pressure that the teeth turn pink. So that's basically what happened to this poor mastodon. He ended up head down, drowning, and stayed that way for months. This is an interesting piece. This was discovered in the pile that was dug out by Stanley McMullen when he was excavating the hole. This is the lower tusk. Mastodons had 2 lower tusks in the lower jaw. And what's fascinating about this one, there are annual growth bands on it. So you can count these up. And when you get back here, there's about 23 or 24 bands. That tells us that the mastodon was 23 or 24 years old. But what was even more fascinating, the last band was just starting to grow when the mastodon died. So that tells us that he died in the early spring, because most growth takes place during the summer. This is another fascinating piece that we recovered. This is a piece of a broken femur or broken thigh bone, broken leg. You can see this fracture here. This fracture here is classic torsion fracture. And we know it happened when the mastodon died because the patina that is developed on this upper surface is the same on the broken surface. And here's a fresh surface that was broken off to compare the two. So we know that the mastodon got stuck in mud, twisted and turned so hard to get out that he broke his leg and just simply laid down and died, unfortunately. Sorry, I'm just going to start a timer here. I'm going to go over there. Yeah, so he broke his leg and just passed away in the water. This is the site that was being excavated by the machine. Everything was being dumped up here, scooped out of here, and dumped up here. That's where the bones, thigh bones, or sorry, the hip bones and the palate were left up there that we first saw. We came back the next day, and this is what we saw. This is the bone horizon here. It's about, what's that, 2 or 3, 4 meters below today's surface. Because this is material that was deposited before the last glaciers came through Nova Scotia. When the last glaciation happened in Nova Scotia, it planed everything off this top surface, everything gone. But it didn't touch this infill, because this is basically a sort of a pitfall trap that material developed in, was deposited in, and stayed there and did not get eroded by the last glaciation. It was fascinating. We had a super storm go through. I can't remember if it was a hurricane or a massive tropical storm. It was known as the perfect storm. It's the one that sank the trawler from Massachusetts out off, I think it was the Grand Banks or somewhere, that was turned into a movie, The Perfect Storm. The perfect storm came through here and it threatened the site. So I asked the quarry superintendent, is this site going to be here in the spring? He said, not a chance. That's going to just slump right into the hole. So we decided we had to do something about it. This is a TV crew here doing filming an interview at the time. There was a massive PR interest in this dig throughout the entire dig, which was a blessing and a curse at times too, but it was more of a blessing. It got the word out about what paleontologists do. So we decided to work all winter and we protect the site and build. We had contracted a contractor to build a building or protection over the hole that we could work within. This was our home for the winter, for a good full winter, and right up till probably the next September. It was a good structure. It kept the snow off of us. It was not heated to the extent that it was warm inside. It was basically just enough to keep it from freezing. This is the inside, as we're just about to start digging down to the bones. Remember, the bones are down here in under about 4 meters of clay and mud. The clay was the consistency of plasticine. You couldn't wash it off, so you had to carve the clay with a knife or with a pick to get it removed. And we were just laying out a grid on the top here that we could drop markers to figure out where we were in the dig in case we found anything interesting. So we decided, actually what happened, I was sitting in my office and Ruth Whitehead, Dr. Ruth Whitehead, ethnologist at the museum at that time, was in my office. We were discussing this whole project. I said, it's really sad. There's only going to be 4 of us seeing all of this mud from 75,000 years ago, and we're liable to miss things. She said, why not get the schools involved? And I said, absolutely brilliant. And so we started a program of documenting these blocks that we would send out to schools. We had these fish boxes donated to us by ROPAC from Spring Hill. They donated them, and we simply dug them out, and we had 10,000 school kids, students working on this project. Very good project and very well received. Here's some of the blocks here. You can see they're 3 deep this way, and we sent over 4.5 tons of mud to the schools. And we tracked each block in a 3-dimensional grid, so that if anything neat was found in one, we knew where it came from. We could look for other things that surrounded and notify the others to watch for something else in their blocks. And it was a good program, went very well. One of the schools in Northport, they grade 6 class, found this beautiful juvenile painted turtle. And I disarticulated him here, took him apart because I wanted to make sure it was from the dig, and looking for clay inside. And yes, it was loaded, full of clay inside. But what's neat about this turtle is these are flesh on the head and the limbs from 75,000 years ago. That is amazing preservation. So we had to get down to the bones. And the only way to do that was to pick and shovel. So we dug away. As you can see, it was snowing. We would take loads out in a wheelbarrow, but then we also later on we hired a small excavator because it was just too slow doing it by hand. This is Kelly Kazera here. She was my assistant at the time, and Richard Billings was hired to be one of our great assistants in looking for things and recovering material. One of the magnificent pieces we uncovered was this entire tree, and every branch was gnawed off by a mastodon. They're all chewed off branches. And in the root mass here, there were several interesting insects found. These white pieces over here are pieces of freshwater mussels, very similar to clams, but these are freshwater mussels. And this we didn't recognize at the time, but that is mastodon dung right there. A little further on in the dig, it's now about March, and we had most number of bones ever visible at one time. These are ribs here, here, and here. This is a vertebra, which I'll refer to in a little while. You can see the shape of it here. This is the scapula or the shoulder blade. There are 5 vertebrae here, and this skull block, or part of the skull here, which we took out in a big block later on. This is the end of the femur here, and it extends into the wall in this section here. That's Kelly describing things to Roger LeBlanc, who was the media services photographer at the time. They came out at least once a week to document what we were doing. We had electric heaters and propane furnaces to keep the ground from freezing. But as you see the way we're dressed, it was not warm by any stretch of the imagination. Plus, we collected these samples right through the whole dig. They gave us a vertical section right through the entire dig. And it was a wet site. That's a pump going there with water being pumped out. And here we have the most important part of the dig, entire dig of all. And this is the note-taking and the documentation of the site. Kelly's taken the notes there, spectacular notes, and I'm digging on just below the skull fragment here. That's those 5 vertebrae. There's the shoulder blade there. That's Ron Bell, who also was employed to help us with the dig. This is the notes that Kelly was taking. She was much better printer than I, so I got Kelly to do all of the note taking, which was wonderful. And this is the layout on the bone plot. We tracked where every bone was from, how high it was in the hole or how low, and the size of it and so on. Any other important details as well. So we filled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 field books with notes. And those are the things that will last forever. The specimens, maybe they'll last forever, here's hoping, but there's always a chance of losing specimens. But these notes and any scientific information that is published from these notes is what is key to the entire dig. This was our challenge. Every time we threw the pick, was a challenge to figure out what was wood and what was bone, because we dug with picks and shovels when we got to the bone horizon, and hunting knives as well. And it was a challenge to figure out what we had. This is a rib, that's a vertebra, there's another vertebra underneath, that's another rib. These are 2 ribs coming off of here, that's probably a sternum style bone. That's wood, and that's wood, and that's wood. So it was always a challenge. The worst part was with the bones, wherever bone was broken, it had the consistency of a bran muffin. You could just flake it apart with your fingers. It was really difficult to work with, and there's no way we could just haul the bones out and take them back to the museum. They just would have powdered. So we had to come up with a way to stabilize them, and we stabilized them using a solution of what's called Roplex at that time. It was since changed to Acrosol, which is a better solution. This one has a tendency to change the pH through time. So we used Roplex, and we would simply, reason we're using a syringe here, because we wanted to know how much we were applying to the bone. It's broken here, so we would apply Roplex to that whole area. Anywhere the bone was broken, we would apply Roplex, and it stabilized the bone well enough that we could remove it. This is another shot of that vertebra I mentioned a little while ago, and we had to come up with a technique of removing the bones easily. We couldn't use plaster here like you see in dinosaur digs, because it was a wet site and the plaster just would not cure. So we created this new method of wrapping the bone with, after exposing the bone, wrapping it with saran wrap or food wrap, then putting a collar of foam packing material around it, and then spraying it completely with spray foam. And when it hardened, we could come along with a knife and just slice it off underneath, and we'd have a solid package to take back to the museum. It would cause no more damage to the bone. This was the scene prior to just finishing the dig. Our plan was not to dig to the bottom of the hole because it kept going. Our plan was to dig 1 meter below the last bone, and that's what we did. This is the 1 meter site below the last bone, and the last bones were these ones here and the ones sitting above here. We even found bird bones in under here, which was magnificent. This is the pile that was being worked on by volunteers outside, because it wasn't crucial to know where the material came from because it was already out of the hole, but it was a recovery exercise, getting whatever we could out of the material that was dug out. And we had Ray Miller and Fred Parker and Kim Tybert. She was an archaeology student at St. Mary's, working on this pile and digging material out. This gentleman here was 74 years old at the time. He was out every day. This gentleman was a real estate agent, and he was out every second or third day, anytime he could get away, and he would come out and help. Super help. It was wonderful because it allowed us to continue with the main dig inside. Getting back to the mine site and the quarry, we had the Cretaceous site over here, 125 million years old, and the potential of dinosaur material in this, but unfortunately it was already excavated, but it had that age material in it. And the first Mastodon site is here, and then the second Mastodon site is over here, about 300 meters away, both 75,000 years old. This was the second site. It was a fascinating dig. We did it in 3 weeks, which was just amazing. And the reason we could do that, because the bone was what's called permineralized. It was petrified. It was partially turned to stone. So I'll elaborate on that in a few moments. But what is neat about this area here, this light color material here extends right through the beds, right through here, and that's referred to as a dung blanket. That's all Mastodon dung in through here, about a centimeter and a half thick. So that tells us there were a lot of Mastodons around at that time. This is what it looked like when we first uncovered it, just as fresh and smelly as the day it was dropped. It was amazing how this material looked and appeared. It was fascinating too, because you can see it's lovely fresh and green and tan colors, just as fresh as the day it was dropped. But in about an hour, that was just brown, dark brown, tan, not much. And in about 2 or 3 hours, it would almost fall apart. It was a 75,000-year-old dung that was trying to rot, and it rotted before our eyes. It was just an amazing process to watch. Pieces of wood up in here. This is also Mastodon dung, and there was a beautiful research done on that recently on one of the pieces from here that gave, this is petrified, this is solid stone, solid rock. It's the Mastodon dung material that's been converted to rock. And it did that because of solutions passing through the beds in this area deposited minerals all around it and replaced a lot of the original material with minerals. Yeah, interesting finds in these, which I'm sure we'll be able to talk about someday. This is what the bone looked like. This is the edge of a part of a hip bone of the juvenile mastodon, which was found on that second site. And you can see all of the pore spaces. You remember the site or the bones from the other site were all open spaces and they would fall apart. All of these pore spaces are infilled with minerals. So it's all basically rock. And all of this material on top was all solidified as well. So we could handle these no problem at all and just pick them up and take them back to the museum. This was the discovery piece of the second mastodon site. It's the lower jaw of a juvenile or a young mastodon with a milk tooth here. And this is the first permanent molar, second permanent molar. Third one is just coming up out of the alveolus here. And there'd be another fourth, maybe a fifth. And so this was a magnificent discovery. What's even better, when we brought this back to the museum when it was first found, it was 11 o'clock at night. My assistant and I are working, Kelly and I are working in the lab, cleaning off. It was covered in sand and mud and debris. And when we were opening it up and washing it off, cleaning it up, in this cavity, in this section here in the tooth, was chewed up wood from the mastodon's last meal. And that has been preserved in the freezer at the museum. Just magnificent, magnificent evidence of what mastodons ate, as well as the dung, of course. A lot of turtles found. We probably had 7 or 8 turtles. This is painted turtles from 75,000 years ago. The only difference is between turtles then and turtles now was in the junction of a couple of scutes. These plates are called scutes. The junction of a couple of these scutes up here are a little bit different from 75,000 years ago. These things puzzled me for about 5 years. I could not figure out what they were. But then in discussing things with our herpetologist, John Gillen at the museum, who I think is still there, he said, well, turtle eggs are soft and leathery. So I looked at these and thought, oh my God, they're turtle eggs. And sure enough, I looked at them under the microscope and you can see a bit of an egg. It's not a shell structure, but it is a true turtle egg. So these are turtle eggs that the turtles have hatched out of, and the shell remains, or the egg casings are left behind. Awesome stuff. This one is the one that was fascinating. Kelly called me on the radio and said, come down here and have a look at this. And I came down, I picked this piece up. Remember, I was describing how you use a magnifying glass. So I had the magnifying glass up to my eye, and I brought this piece up to have a look at it because I wasn't sure exactly what it was. And I said, quick, smell that. And she did. She said, oh, it smells like a skunk. I said, well, if you've ever handled a modern day garter snake, you know they leave a bit of a stench on your hand. Well, that's what this was. This is the stench from a 75,000-year-old garter snake. And there's no way I can publish that in a scientific literature because there is no evidence that of a smell. How do you publish a smell? So anyway, so that specimen is in the museum collection too. The story does not end. If you're looking for some bones to look at, some more information, if you're driving by Stewiacke, stop in and you'll see this is Marvin, a reconstruction of Marvin. He's a very well-fed mastodon standing on the hill in Stewiacke at Mastodon Ridge. And this is Stanley McMullen here, the gentleman who found him. And this is Bill Hay, the gentleman who at the time owned Mastodon Ridge and developed it and paid for this out of his own pocket to be created. So I thank these two gentlemen immensely for what they've done to preserve the story. And you can see a lot more at Mastodon Ridge and also upcoming at the Museum of Natural History, from what I hear. And with that, Mastodon Ridge, yeah, it's a complex there in Stewiacke. Well worth stopping in to have a look at, and they have a lot of good stuff there. And with that, I will say thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a chance to visit Stewiacke, the Mastodon there, and later on the exhibits at the Museum of Natural History, of course, where a lot of you work, and where I had 26 spectacular years.
Thank you, Bob. What a great talk.
Oh,
I'm so glad you're able to share that with us all. That's what a project. And you know, I've done 2 weeks worth of fossil digging at one point, and I was exhausted. And I can just imagine how tired you were after all that. And Kelly too. Kelly put in a lot of work to that.
Especially
project.
every day we would work till about 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night as well, and be back 8:30 the next morning. So it was a labor of absolute love, just spectacular.
That's great.
Just passionate about it. Love it.
Great.